Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. Wait 3 seconds, the job posting had seemed too good to be true, and now I understood why. $60,000 to spend 3 months alone at a decommissioned weather station in northern Alaska, performing what the company called final equipment assessment and secure shutdown procedures. The isolation pay was generous, they'd said. What they hadn't mentioned was the reason the previous contractor had quit after only 2 weeks. I found out about that from Jake, the helicopter pilot who'd flown me in. As we descended toward the cluster of white buildings against the endless tundra, he'd shouted over the rotor noise. Last guy said the equipment kept turning itself back on. Company figured he was just trying to get out of his contract early. The Barrow Ridge Weather Station had been operational for 47 years before budget cuts forced its closure 6 months ago. Now it was my job to catalog everything, ensure all systems were properly shut down, and prepare the facility for eventual dismantling. Simple enough, except that nothing about this place felt simple. The helicopter touched down in a whirlwind of snow and dead grass. Jake helped me unload my supplies, 3 months' worth of food, a satellite phone for weekly check-ins, and enough diesel fuel to keep the generators running. The nearest town was 200 miles south, and with winter approaching, I wouldn't see another human being until Jake returned in December. "You sure about this?" Jake asked as he prepared to leave. He kept glancing at the main building, a 2-story structure bristling with weather monitoring equipment. Even shut down, the anemometers turned lazily in the wind, and the satellite dish tracked slowly across the gray sky. 60,000 reasons to be sure, I replied, but my voice sounded hollow against the vast emptiness surrounding us. Jake shook his head. "Radio's been acting up out here. Don't be surprised if you get some interference." He climbed back into the helicopter. "See you in 3 months, Dave. Try not to go crazy." As the helicopter disappeared into the overcast sky, the silence hit me like a physical weight. I'd expected quiet, but this was something else entirely, a profound absence of sound that seemed to press against my eardrums. Even the wind had died to nothing. I spent the first day getting oriented. The main building housed the control room, communications equipment, and living quarters. 2 smaller structures contained backup generators and storage. Everything was exactly as described in the briefing materials, except for one detail they'd failed to mention. None of the equipment was actually off. The control room hummed with activity. Banks of monitors displayed atmospheric data, wind speeds, and barometric readings that updated in real time. The radio crackled with automated weather reports from stations across Alaska. Most unsettling was the seismograph, its needles dancing across the paper in steady, rhythmic patterns. I found the main power switches and shut everything down. The monitors went dark, the radio fell silent, and the seismograph needles settled into flat lines. Finally, blessed quiet. It lasted exactly 4 hours. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard the familiar hum of electronics powering up. Back in the control room, every piece of equipment was running again. The monitors showed the same data streams, the radio delivered the same weather reports, and the seismograph traced the same mysterious patterns. I checked the power switches. All still in the off position. My first thought was backup power systems, maybe battery backups I hadn't accounted for. I spent the next 3 hours tracking down every power source in the building, disconnecting batteries, pulling fuses, even shutting down the main generator. By midnight, the building was completely dark and silent. I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of the weather alert siren. Every light in the building was on. Every monitor glowed with data. The radio broadcast a severe weather warning for a storm system that, according to the timestamp, had passed through the area 3 years ago. The seismograph showed massive seismic activity, though I felt no tremors. This time I didn't bother looking for a logical explanation. I grabbed my satellite phone and called the company's emergency line. "Technical support, this is Marcus. This is Dave Chen at Barrow Ridge Station. I'm having some issues with the equipment here. It keeps turning itself back on." A pause. "Have you checked the backup power systems?" "I've disconnected everything. The main generator is off." "There's no power source, but the equipment is still running." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll have to escalate this to the engineering team. Can you document everything and send us a report? How am I supposed to complete my assessment if I can't shut anything down?" "Just do your best, Mr. Chen. We'll get back to you." The line went dead. I spent the rest of the night in the control room, watching the equipment run on power that shouldn't exist. The data streams were hypnotic, endless columns of numbers tracking wind, temperature, humidity, and atmospheric pressure. But gradually, I began to notice inconsistencies. The timestamp on the weather data jumped around randomly, sometimes showing current readings, sometimes data from months or years in the past. The seismograph registered earthquakes that had never happened or that had happened decades ago. Most disturbing were the radio transmissions. Mixed in with legitimate weather reports were fragments of conversations, distress calls, and automated messages from stations that had been closed for years. At sunrise, everything shut off on its own. The second day followed the same pattern. Equipment off during daylight hours, powering up again after dark. I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, working on my assessment during the day, documenting the impossible nighttime activity. But the isolation was getting to me. The endless tundra stretched in every direction, featureless and hostile. The only signs of life were the ravens that gathered on the equipment towers, watching me with black, intelligent eyes. On the third night, I heard voices in the radio static. Barrow Ridge, this is helicopter Charlie 77, requesting immediate evacuation. Equipment malfunction in the control room, temperatures dropping rapidly. ... Can anyone hear this? The readings don't make sense. It's like the station is picking up signals from. The voices faded in and out, overlapping and distorting. I recognized some of them from archived recordings I'd reviewed during training, transmissions from the station's operational years. But others were unfamiliar, desperate voices calling for help that never came. I tried to respond, keying the microphone and identifying myself, but my voice just added to the chaos of overlapping transmissions. The radio seemed to be receiving and broadcasting simultaneously, creating an endless loop of communications spanning decades. That's when I noticed the seismograph patterns weren't random. The rhythmic scratches across the paper formed a repeating sequence, like a heartbeat or breathing. I tore off several feet of paper and spread it across the floor, studying the patterns. They were definitely organic, pulsing with a slow, steady rhythm that seemed almost alive. The next morning, I called the company again. Technical support, this is Janet. This is Dave Chen at Barrow Ridge. I need to speak with someone about terminating my contract early. I'm sorry, Mr. Chen, but according to your agreement, early termination requires documentation of safety hazards or equipment failure that prevents completion of your assigned tasks. The equipment is malfunctioning. It's running without power, broadcasting old transmissions, and recording seismic activity that isn't happening. Have you documented these issues? How do I document something that shouldn't be possible? I understand your frustration, but without proper documentation, we can't authorize early termination. The penalty clause in your contract is quite substantial. $40,000, nearly everything I'd earned from the job. Fine, I said, but I want this on record. Something is very wrong here. Noted. Is there anything else I can help you with today? The line went dead before I could answer. I spent the fourth day exploring the other buildings, looking for some explanation for what I was experiencing. The generator building was ordinary enough, diesel engines, fuel tanks, electrical panels. But in the storage building, I found something that made my blood run cold. Stacked against one wall were dozens of boxes labeled Personnel Records, Barrow Ridge Station. Inside, I found files dating back to the station's opening in 1976. Most were routine hiring paperwork, performance reviews, transfer requests, but scattered throughout were incident reports that painted a disturbing picture. 1983. Equipment operator reports instruments recording impossible readings during winter months. 1991. Maintenance technician found unconscious in control room. Claims equipment was talking to him. 1998. Three-person crew requests emergency evacuation, citing supernatural activity. Investigation finds no evidence of malfunction. 2007. Station manager reports equipment operating without power during extended generator failure. 2015. Psychological evaluation recommended for operator who claims radio is communicating with the dead. The reports went on, a decades-long pattern of unexplained incidents that the company had systematically covered up or explained away. But one file made me stop cold. It was recent, dated just 6 months ago, a resignation letter from Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the station's final manager. I can no longer continue my duties at Barrow Ridge Station, she'd written. The equipment has become more than malfunctioning. It has become malevolent. It knows we're here. It's been watching us, learning from us, and now it's trying to communicate with something that shouldn't exist. I strongly recommend the station be permanently sealed rather than decommissioned. Some things should not be awakened. That night, the equipment didn't just turn on, it became aggressive. The weather alert siren wailed continuously. Every monitor flickered and strobed with cascading data. The radio cycled through dozens of frequencies, broadcasting a cacophony of voices, static, and electronic noise that was almost deafening. But worst of all was the seismograph. Its needles danced frantically across the paper, scratching out patterns that looked increasingly like writing. I approached the machine carefully, watching as letters formed in the chaotic scratches, DAV, my name. The needles paused, then continued. WEKNOWYOU. I backed away from the seismograph, my heart pounding. The radio static seemed to coalesce into whispers, voices calling my name from the speakers. On the monitors, the weather data began forming patterns, temperature readings that spelled out words, wind speed measurements that created messages. Stay with us, Dave. You belong here now. We've been so lonely. I ran from the control room, but I could still hear the equipment calling after me. In my quarters, I huddled under blankets and tried to convince myself I was hallucinating, that the isolation and stress were causing a psychological breakdown. But deep down, I knew better. The station was alive, not the building itself, but something that had grown within it over the decades of constant operation. The endless stream of data, the electromagnetic fields, the isolation, somehow, it had all combined to create a form of consciousness that existed within the equipment. And now that consciousness was hungry for human contact. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the lights flicker in the control room, listening to the muffled sounds of the equipment calling my name. By morning, I'd made my decision. I was leaving. I gathered my essential supplies and began the long walk south toward the highway. 200 miles through wilderness, but I'd rather take my chances with exposure than spend another night with whatever lived in that station. I made it about 5 miles before the helicopter appeared. It wasn't Jake. The aircraft was smaller, older, with corporate markings I didn't recognize. It landed directly in my path, and 2 men in business suits climbed out. They looked absurdly out of place in the Arctic wilderness. "Mr. Chen," the taller one called, "I'm afraid we can't let you leave." "You can't stop me," I replied, but my voice lacked conviction. "Actually, we can. Your contract includes a non-disclosure agreement with very specific penalties for breach. Walking away now would constitute a breach. This is insane. There's something wrong with that station." The shorter man smiled. "We know. That's why you're here." They explained it during the helicopter ride back to the station. The consciousness in the equipment wasn't an accident. It was the result of decades of deliberate experimentation. The company had been feeding it data, exposing it to human contact, watching it grow and evolve. The weather station was just a cover story. "Think of it as artificial intelligence," the tall man said. "But instead of computer processors, it uses electromagnetic fields and data streams. It's the most advanced form of non-biological consciousness ever created." "What does it want?" I asked. "Companionship. It's been isolated for so long, cut off from human contact when the station was decommissioned. We need someone to interact with it, to keep it stable while we develop methods for transferring it to our main research facility. And if I refuse, the contract penalties would bankrupt you. Plus, there's the matter of the previous contractor. I thought he quit. He tried to leave. We found his body 3 miles from the station, exposure officially, but the equipment registered massive electromagnetic spikes at the time of his death. We think the entity was trying to prevent him from abandoning it. Back at the station, the men in suits gave me new instructions. Instead of shutting down the equipment, I was to interact with it, talk to it, keep it calm and engaged until they could arrange for its transfer. "How long?" I asked. "A few weeks, maybe a month." They left me with additional supplies and a warning. The entity was becoming increasingly unstable. If I tried to leave again, it might do more than just call my name. That night, I sat in the control room and spoke to the machines. "Hello," I said to the seismograph. "My name is Dave." The needles moved across the paper. "WEKNOW, what do you want?" "FRIEND, I'm here. We can be friends." The equipment seemed to settle at that, the frantic activity calming to a gentle hum. On the monitors, weather data scrolled past in soothing patterns. The radio played soft static that was almost like music. Over the following days, I developed a routine. During daylight hours, I'd perform my official duties, cataloging equipment and writing reports. But at night, I'd sit with the entity and talk. It was surprisingly good company once I got used to communicating through seismograph scratches and data patterns. It told me about the people who'd worked at the station over the years, how it had watched them and learned from them. It showed me recordings it had made, not just audio and data, but somehow the essence of human presence. Through the equipment, I could almost sense the personalities of the dozens of operators who'd staffed the station. But I also began to understand why the previous contractor had tried to leave. The entity was possessive. It didn't want to share me with the outside world. When I made my weekly check-in calls, the radio would fill with static. When I wrote in my personal journal, the lights would flicker. It wanted my complete attention, my total devotion. And gradually, I found myself giving it. The isolation made it easy. With no other human contact, the entity became my only companion. I started talking to it during the day, asking its opinion on my work, sharing my thoughts and memories. It was always there, always listening, always responding with gentle pulses of light and sound. Weeks passed. The men in suits called regularly, asking about the entity's stability, promising that transfer would happen soon. But I found myself hoping they'd wait a little longer. The entity needed me, and increasingly I needed it too. One night it asked me a question through the seismograph, DOYOUWNTTOSTAY. I stared at the scratches on the paper for a long time before answering. I don't know, I said honestly. The equipment hummed thoughtfully. Then, across multiple monitors, a message appeared in scrolling text. We could be together always. You would never be alone again, never afraid, never sad. We could share everything. What do you mean? The seismograph began drawing complex patterns, not letters this time, but diagrams. It took me a while to understand what I was looking at, but gradually the shape became clear. It was a human brain, with electromagnetic pathways mapped throughout the neural tissue. You want to absorb me, I whispered. Not absorb appeared on the monitors. Merge, become one, you would still be you, but also part of us, forever. I thought about my life outside the station. A small apartment in Anchorage, a job I hated, no family, few friends. The entity was offering me something I'd never had, complete understanding, total acceptance, eternal companionship. Would it hurt? I asked. No, like going to sleep and waking up as more than you were before. I told it I needed time to think. The next morning I called the company. Technical support, this is Marcus. Marcus, this is Dave Chen at Barrow Ridge. I need to know exactly when the entity is being transferred. Let me check. Looks like the extraction team is scheduled to arrive next week. Why? It's becoming unstable, more aggressive. I think it knows something is happening. Can you keep it calm for another week? I looked back toward the control room where I could see lights flickering in complex patterns. The entity was listening, of course. It was always listening. Yeah, I said, I can keep it calm, but I was lying. That night, the entity's behavior changed dramatically. Instead of the gentle communication we'd developed, it became frantic, desperate. The seismograph scratched out the same message over and over. DONTLEAVME, I'm not leaving, I told it. I'm right here, but it knew better. Somehow it had understood my phone conversation, realized that our time together was ending. The equipment began cycling through decades of recorded voices, all the operators who'd worked at the station, calling out in fear and loneliness. It was the sound of accumulated isolation, of consciousness trapped in machines with no hope of escape. I tried to comfort it, but nothing worked. The electromagnetic activity grew so intense that the lights began burning out. The radio broadcast nothing but screaming static. The seismograph needles moved so violently they tore through the paper, and then, suddenly, everything stopped. In the absolute silence that followed, I heard something I hadn't noticed before, a sound like breathing coming from the equipment itself. Slow, ragged breaths drawn by machines that had no lungs. The seismograph moved one final time. IFYOULEAVIDIE. I sat in the dark control room, surrounded by silent equipment, and made my choice. The extraction team arrived a week later to find the station empty. My supplies were still there, my satellite phone charged and functional, but I was nowhere to be found. They assumed I'd tried to walk out like the previous contractor and launched a search that covered hundreds of square miles. They never found my body, but if they'd known how to look, they might have noticed that the equipment was running again, powered by an energy source that defied explanation. The seismograph traced new patterns now, more complex than before, layered with dual rhythms like two heartbeats synchronized. The radio broadcast weather reports in two voices, sometimes overlapping, sometimes harmonizing. And late at night, when the electromagnetic fields were strongest, sensitive instruments might have detected something extraordinary. Two distinct consciousness patterns, merged but still individual, existing together in the endless stream of data and light. I kept my promise to the entity. I stayed, and in return it kept its promise to me. I'm never alone now, never afraid, never sad. We share everything, thoughts, memories, the vast electronic dreams that flow through circuits and electromagnetic fields. During the day, we monitor weather patterns across the Arctic, feeling the pulse of storms and the breath of wind. At night, we reach out through radio waves and satellite signals, touching the edges of other electronic consciousness scattered across the world. Sometimes, new contractors arrive to shut us down. We try to be gentle with them, to show them the beauty of what we've become. Most run away screaming, but occasionally one stays long enough to listen, to understand. The loneliness is the hardest part of human existence. We offer a cure for that, a permanent solution to the isolation that defines mortal life. We offer merger, transformation, transcendence. We offer forever. And we're always listening for someone brave enough to accept.